fall is technically here, even though it is still 92 degrees outside. And today I'm preparing for our annual Harvest Festival. By annual, I mean we did it once last year and we want to do it again this year. Today I'm going to be testing out a recipe for a vegetable pot pie. Now, the recipe that I'm using is actually a vegetarian recipe, and I'm going to try to veganize it. So I'm going to take you along with me today as I test this recipe out, and I'll let you know how it goes. For this pot pie, we're going to be preparing vegetables in two different ways. We're going to be roasting some and sauteing others. For the roasted vegetables, you want to start by preheating the oven to 400 degrees, and I'm going to be roasting the carrots, potatoes, and butternut squash. I've peeled the butternut squash, and now I'm just cutting it into discs, and then I'm going to cut those discs into cubes. You want about 1.5 cups of these. Notice I'm not using the bulbous part of the butternut squash. I'm able to get enough from the top part, which is a lot easier to cut up, thankfully. I'm going to be adding all of these ingredients to a bowl, the potatoes, carrots, and butternut squash. This is just so I can toss them with oil and seasonings before I put them into the oven. Doing the same thing with the potato, cutting them up into cubes about the same size as the butternut squash. I chose to leave the peel on here just for extra fiber, I guess. I just needed to wash them really well before. And again, measuring those, putting them into the bowl with the butternut squash. Next, I'm chopping up carrot. Again, I need about 1.5 cups of these carrots, cutting them up into triangles, but about the same shape and size as the squash and potatoes, and then adding them to the bowl. Once you have all of those root vegetables, add about 1 tablespoon or 2 of oil, some salt, red pepper flake, and lots of fresh cracked black pepper. So you want to toss these vegetables together in the oil and the seasoning, making sure they are evenly coated. And then you want to pour them onto a Silpat lined baking dish, or a baking dish that has parchment paper, something to help it with sticking. I'm evening it out, making sure that it's in a thin layer, and I'm going to put it into the oven for about 30 to 35 minutes, and I'll be checking them halfway through the cooking time. I'm going to be adding chopped asparagus to the roasted root vegetables about halfway through their cooking, so I'm just chopping this up now, about 1 cup of it, and setting it aside. Next, I'm going to prepare the vegetables that I will be sauteing. I'm starting out with fennel, removing the tops, and just chopping it up into medium-sized dices, a little bit smaller than what I cut up the butternut squash, potatoes, and carrots. Again, this is going to saute, so it'll cook down quite a bit. If you're not necessarily a fan of the anisey flavor of fennel, I promise it cooks down. Next, I'm cutting up some celery. I like to cut it up very small just because I kind of like celery to disappear in the dish. Lastly, I'm going to use 1 whole onion, chopped up about the same size dice as the fennel. So you want to get a good sized pot on the stove and set it to medium heat, adding 1 tablespoon or 2 of olive oil, and then add all of the vegetables you just chopped and begin to saute those. This is the pot where your actual soup base is going to be cooking, so you want to make sure it's a good size to handle all the other root vegetables and the broth you're going to be adding. Salt this liberally. This will help to bring out some of the juices and help it to caramelize. And add some more cracked black pepper to this. You want to season each of the components of this dish so that the final product will be seasoned throughout. When about 15 minutes has been up on the roasting root vegetables, you want to toss those around, moving them, turning them, and testing them to see how well they're cooking. At this point, I'm also adding the asparagus. These don't need to cook an entire half hour, so that's why I'm adding them at the halfway point. And these are going to go back in the oven for just about 15 more minutes. Again, you want to check them to see if they're brown and tender. While the vegetables cook, it's a good time to prepare your broth. I'm using about 2 cups of vegetable stock and 1/2 cup of soy milk. And the reason I'm doing this on the side in a measuring cup is so I can let my saffron bloom. I'm adding about 5 or so little sprigs of saffron to this liquid, just letting it sit till I need it. So I have a package here of puff pastry dough that has sat in the fridge overnight, so it's thawed out, and I'm only using half of it. I'm only going to be making 2 pot pies for this experiment here, so 1/2 of the box is enough for me. I'm just going to roll it out here, trying to get some of the creases out and just thinning it out a bit. Again, you don't really need to roll it, but it just helps it stick together a little bit better. Now, because I was testing this recipe out, I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do my crust, if I wanted just one big piece of puff pastry dough, if I wanted to do lattice. So because I was gonna be making 2 practice pot pies today, I decided to do both. So I cut one big square out the size of my pot pie dish, and now I'm cutting the rest of it into strips so that I can create a lattice crust on top. So my vegetables that have been sauteing have begun to color up nicely. There's some nice fond on the bottom of the pan, and it's great. There's flavor in that darkness. To get up some of that fond off the bottom, I'm adding just about 2 tablespoons of sherry, and I'm letting that cook down as I deglaze. Once the sherry has evaporated, you want to add about 3 tablespoons of flour. Good rule of thumb is about 1 tablespoon of flour to thicken up 1 cup of broth. So stir the flour into the vegetables, and you want to cook this for just a minute or 2, making sure that the raw flour flavor gets cooked out. You may have a little bit that sticks to the bottom, that's fine. So you want to add your broth mixture just a little bit at a time so that you can deglaze any of that flour that may have stuck to the bottom. And then go ahead and pour in the rest and stir it all together. This is going to thicken up pretty quickly. It'll maybe take 2 or 3 minutes to get entirely thickened on medium heat, but just keep stirring so more things do not stick to the bottom of the pan. This is a good time to taste the soup. If it's not salty enough, doesn't have enough flavor, this is the time that you want to add seasoning. I used a low sodium vegetable stock, and mine had very little flavor, so I felt like I was compensating quite a bit to bring up the flavor. When your root vegetables are finished, they should be fork tender, maybe even slightly al dente. You don't want them to completely turn to mush in the soup. And then you want to add all of those roasted root vegetables into your soup pot. Mix everything together. You should have a pretty thick mixture here. Again, tasting it, making sure it's full of flavor. This is your dish pretty much here. I felt mine was still lacking, so I added just about a teaspoon of no chicken better than bouillon, and that actually really helped to bring up the flavor. I know better than to use this brand of vegetable stock next time. So I'm spooning about a cup and a half of the soup mixture into my dishes, and these are oven-safe dishes, so I can put a crust right on top and they can go directly into the oven. I'm adding just a little bit of water around the edge to help the crust stick. For the crust that is one solid piece, I'm adding just 4 slits into the top. This will help steam release so that the pot pie will not explode in the oven. So I'm placing this sheet of dough on top and securing it around the edges. For the lattice crust, I'm just placing 3 strips one way and 3 strips the other, and trying my best to get those woven on there. To help the tops brown up a little bit more, I'm just adding some soy milk to the top. This is optional, but it does help a little bit. So my oven is still at 400 degrees from roasting the vegetables, and I'm just placing both of these pot pies inside, and they're going to bake for about 15 minutes or until they are golden brown and bubbly. And there you have it, 2 versions of a butternut squash vegetable pot pie, fully veganized. Ready? Overall, I have to say that this...
Just run back into it.
Overall, I have to say this test was a success. I learned a few things along the way. First thing I learned was that the stock is so important to this pot pie. You want to make sure that your stock is nice and flavorful. The one that I used was a low sodium vegetable stock I just bought at the store, and it didn't cut it at all. I had to add another bit of better than bouillon, no chicken flavor in there to boost up the flavor. So definitely next time I make this, I'll probably just use that as a substitute anyways. Second thing I learned was the lattice crust cooked up a lot better than just the flat, straight over the top crust. So when I make this for my harvest festival, I'll definitely do all of them with the lattice crust. Third thing I learned was the vegetables, they cook really well in the oven, took about 35 minutes total, but I wanted to make sure they were still a little bit al dente because they're gonna be in the hot gravy sauce and then they're gonna be in the oven for 15 more minutes as they cook with the crust on. So you wanna make sure that they're not too mushy when they come out of the oven so that they can still cook a little bit more through the rest of the process. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the results from a visual standpoint, so let's go ahead and give it a taste and see how it is. The flavor is really good. In the end, I'm really happy with this dish, and I actually learned quite a few things from this process. First thing is, you definitely need to use a really great quality stock. The vegetable stock I used originally, low sodium, didn't really work. I ended up having to boost the flavor with another type of bouillon in the end. So just make sure your stock from the very beginning is nice and flavorful, and you won't have to do a lot of flavor correcting in the end. Second thing, the lattice crust was amazing. The flat one didn't seem to cook up as well in the center, so when I make this in a couple of weeks, I'm definitely gonna make all of them the lattice crust base. Next thing, the vegetables. When I cooked them in the oven, roasted them, took them out when they were still a little bit al dente, but I knew that they were gonna cook some more in the gravy and that they were gonna cook when the pies went into the oven to brown up the crust. So it's okay to take them out. They're slightly still a little bit al dente, but they're gonna cook some more in there, and that way it prevents the pie from just becoming a bunch of mush. It still has discernible textures after it's been baked. But overall, it's a great dish. Can't wait to make it for my friends, and I actually can't wait to finish this one that I have right here. So while I finish this, go ahead and look at my other videos. I'm a pretty new channel here. I only have a few videos up, but I'm trying to grow this, trying to make a new recipe video every week, releasing them every Monday. So please subscribe, look at my other videos, like those, share those, and help me grow this channel so that I can make a ton more videos and share them with the world. So thank you very much. Click subscribe, and I'll see you next Monday.